So there is a fundamental difference that most people in commercial understand between commercial real estate and residential real estate. And it's more philosophical than factual, but it's very important. And that is, whichever way you cut, slice, or dice it, when you deal with residential investment property, you deal with people. Now, I know there's a document called the Residential Tenancy Act, and they have to sign it. But in essence, you're dealing with people and the vagaries of their thinking. So you'll have a tenant call you and say, well, the toilet's blocked. And you say, well, what on earth are you putting in there? This is the third time in the last month that it's blocked. And they said, none of your stinking business, but get it fixed. I said, right, I'll call the plumber. So you call the plumber. Well, I can do 2 p.m. on Friday. So you call the tenant. He says, no, mate, I'm busy then. Make it Monday. Well, why didn't you tell me that before? But anyway, what have you got on Monday? Well, I've got these times. Does that work? No, but Tuesday would work. And you're dealing with people, all right? The council sends a notice to the landlord to say the grass out front is too high, and you as owner of the property have to get it cut. And you call the tenant and say, I got a letter from council. They say it has to be cut. Well, I cut it last week. It doesn't matter. I still got the letter, and they still say it's too long. And if we don't cut it, then, did you say we cut it? Well, then you cut it. I said, no, according to the tenancy agreement. You hear what I'm saying? You're dealing with people. Whereas with commercial real estate, in essence, even though people are involved, the tenant, in essence, you deal with contracts. All right, so whatever's stipulated in the contract, that's what happens. How does this manifest itself? All over the world, if you're behind in your rental payment on your home, how quickly can you take action? Can you evict them a day later? No. In some jurisdictions, the laws are very strict. In California, for instance, you have to wait 90 days from the day that they're first late before you can take any serious action. I'm happy to announce that in Vegas, it's only 5 days, and you can turn up with the sheriff and literally evict him. But in general, governments all over the world give tenants a lot of leeway because, let's face it, it's not their fault that they're behind in rent. It's society's fault because society's rapacious. In fact, you racketeering, rapacious, fat-bellied landlords are probably part of the problem because you're sucking so much money out of the economy that you're making these tenants poor. So we're going to enact legislation to protect those poor, kind, innocent tenants while you mean-spirited, rich, fat pigs can suffer. You know, that's sort of the attitude. And does that work in general? Yes, because when they go for elections, remember the primary aim of any candidate is to be re-elected. It's not necessarily to do good. And if you were to go up on a platform for re-election, would you get more votes if you protected tenants or if you protected landlords? Tenants, because there are just more of them. So it's there's a saying that any politician can get elected so long as the number of people to whom he's promising 3 free ice creams every day is larger than the number of people he has to tax to pay for them. You follow me? So, commercial is contracts. Everything's spelled out. So when a tenant is behind in their commercial lease, it's already stated in the lease that if it's more than 1 day behind, or 5 days, or 10 days, it just depends. Usually you do what's normal in that jurisdiction, then penalty shall accrue at the rate of 1% per month on an annual basis, and there might also be a lump sum penalty. And if they still don't pay, you can distrain for rent. Does anyone know what it means to distrain for rent? You can seize the premises. You can change the locks. Now, can you seize the staff? Anyone? No, of course not. That would be kidnapping or whatever it's called, or withholding against their will. But you can change the locks. You can seize their plant, equipment, inventory, everything. And then you can sell it off. Under very strict conditions, you have to run a minimum number of ads of a minimum size and a minimum number of publications, a minimum time before the auction, and you have to hold it for auction so that you get a fair market price. But then when you collect the thousands of dollars from selling their stuff, you can apply that to the back rent and the penalty rent and the penalty interest. And if there's any money left over, guess what? No, you have to give it to them. But even so, you can do that. Can you do that with residential tenants who are late? Can you seize your home and seize their clothes and their teeth? No, of course not. And tenants know that. So if you have a person who is a tenant in both a commercial premise and a home, and he can only pay one of the two, but he can't pay both, guess which one he's not going to pay? The house. All right, so you've just got much better security of rent. You've got contracts, and I love those contracts. So now let's explore some of the advantages, the pros of commercial real estate. Can anyone think of some of the advantages you've got with commercial? Yes, sir.
Tenant pays.
The tenant pays rent? Oh, okay. So this is a very important one. We'll call it the outgoings. With most residential property, your tenant pays their rent, sometimes on a weekly basis, in many parts of the world on a monthly basis, but the landlord has to pay the rates, the insurance, the maintenance. Most commercial lease documents are stipulated that the tenant shall pay their portion, if it's many tenants, their portion of the rates and insurance and the maintenance. And you even stipulate how that ratio, if there are multiple tenants, is derived. It's based on square meters of what they occupy versus the other tenants, or they have the prime spot, the ground floor or something. They're up for 16.8% of all the outgoings. So that's a very good one. Do you see the power of that? So, and that's called a triple net lease for those of you who are familiar with it, right? It's triple net. It's net of rates, insurance, and maintenance. That makes a huge difference to your returns. Also, if the council increases the rates or if the insurance company ups the premium, you just pass it on to the lessee. In fact, we usually have all our payments, all of them without exception, are made by automatic bank transfer. And instead of having one for the rent and the outgoings, we always split it into two. And this is just a minor point, but file it away in the back of your mind somewhere. We have the rent, and then in the bank statement we have next rent review and the date for it so that it triggers us in a memory. And then we have the outgoings. Why would we separate them? Because the leases, they have specific times for rent reviews. And even if the council increases the rates and you pass that on to the tenant, only one of their two APs change. They can see that the rent has stayed the same for the entire duration of that rent review period. All right, they don't think that you're hoodwinking them or whatever. So it's just a minor point. So outgoing, very important one, very significant. Someone else. All right, same person. What's another advantage? Longer lease. Who said that? Do you think that's an advantage? Yes, longer lease. It's hugely important. So I'm going to call that lease length. I'm going to abbreviate it. Lease length, yes. With residential, sometimes you struggle to get a 1-year lease, and certainly 2 or 3, that's tough. And usually when that expires or rolls over, it goes to monthly basis or weekly basis, correct? But with commercial, not only is it normal to have longer lease lengths, but the tenants want it. The most frequent question we get from our portfolio around the world is, could I get an extension on the lease, please? And we look it up and we say, but you have still 5 years to run. And they say, yes, could we get an extension on the lease, please? Why would they want an extension when they've still got 5 years to run? To protect their business. There's an aspect to real estate, commercial real estate, that if you're new to it, it's kind of new, and if you know it, it's old hat. But it's called goodwill, and it's an intangible. And they have goodwill from the reputation they've got and the customer service they give. That's why Zadel Properties has tremendous goodwill in terms of the quality of the service they offer. Would you agree with that? Certainly my impression. But it's also location, because of you've got thousands of clients and they always drive to the same spot. Then, of course, they want to use the same premise. So they want a longer lease. Even if they are going to sell within 3 months, they ask for an extension of the lease. Why do you think that might be? They're not going to be there anymore. What do they care? Because it affects the sale price. If you say, yes, I've got this multi-million-dollar business and it's been going for 20 years and I want to sell it now for $10 million. And they say, well, how long to run on the lease? And you say, well, actually, it expires next week. That's not as good as we've got a 5-year period locked in with a right of renewal for another 3 periods of 5 years. That's exciting, isn't it? So it's a very important one that we overlook. So you've got a longer lease length. What else? Over here, sorry? The maintenance, yes. The lease clause always says that the tenants shall maintain the property in the same condition that it was when they took over the premises. So, when a tap leaks in a home or the toilet gets blocked, they call you and say, stupid house, the toilet's blocked again, as if it's your fault, right? But when that happens on a commercial property, they don't call you. Firstly, they know that in the lease it's their responsibility to fix it. And secondly, they know that if you call it, you're out playing golf. I just use that as an example. I don't actually play golf because my name prevents it. People would have to call and say, do you want a game of golf, Dolf? It doesn't happen. No, I'm serious. That's why I haven't yet met a man called Dennis who plays tennis, and I'm sure it's for the same reason. But if you were playing golf, they'd call you and say, hey, my tap's leaking. And you'd say, yes, and I've got 84 yards to my destination, whatever that's called, the hole that you throw the ball into, batted into. You can tell I'm not a sports person, but I didn't know A-Rod either. It takes too long. Then you have to call the plumber and call them. No, they call it, they get it fixed, they want their business up and running. So yes, they look after things. I'm just going to call it maintenance, but not only that. How many of you have had residential tenants who have added an extra bedroom to your home? Or, I can't even say with a straight face, or have put a new kitchen in or something. It doesn't happen, does it? It's never happened. The best remodeling I've had, and I wouldn't call it the best, but the most I've had in terms of remodeling, is where they tried to make it bigger by punching holes in the wall. And then they had the audacity to call me to fix it because it's drafty. You know, whereas commercial tenants earn their income on the premises. They have a vested interest in having it look good. So they want you to do things to it, and they want to do things themselves. So they will paint it. I have some shops, they paint their premises every 2 years because they want it fresh and crisp and clean and no faded colors or anything. Is that good? All right, so very interesting difference. It gets better than that. Most commercial leases have a clause that if the lessee requests the lessor to make improvements and the lessor chooses to agree, then extra rental shall be paid to the landlord at the rate of X% of the cost of the improvement. All right, so I'll give you an example. I had a tenant call me and they said, listen, I know that the lease says that if I want to make changes, I have to get your permission first. I said, yes, that's right. And he said, well, I want to tear down the entire front wall of the building. And I said, so far, permission not granted. And he said, but I want to replace it with a glass wall because that'll allow more light in and people driving by can see it, and I think it'll be great. I said, perfect. And he said, well, it's going to cost about $100,000. I said, great. You have my permission. And that's when he said, well, one more minor thing. I'd like you to pay for it. Now, what would you say? No, right? No. Why would you pay for that? Well, this was in the days when going interest rates were 10%. Is that high or low? It depends on the market. Do you remember a time when interest rates were 16%? Who's got enough grey hair to remember 16%? Yes, and more, right? A lot more. So 10% is pretty hot. In fact, if you need interest rates to be below 10% to make your deal work, I'd say look for other deals, you know. So it's just what they were. So my clause in the lease said that if the landlord makes improvements, extra rental should be paid at the rate of 12%. So think about this. They wanted me to pay the $100,000, but they were willing to pay an extra $12,000 a year in rent. Now is it looking good? Yeah, it's looking a lot better, right? Still depends, but it's looking good. I get a 12% return. Now, you might ask, why wouldn't the landlord pay for it and he would save $12,000? He'd get the 12% return. Well, he didn't have the capital. All right? Forget whether I have the capital. It's not about how much capital you've got. The most expensive piece of real estate is the 6 inches, give or take an inch or two, between your right ear and your left ear, because it's what you can create in your noggin that will determine your net worth ultimately. All right? So he wanted me to spend $100,000. I'd get $12,000 a year in extra rent. That's a 12% return. Is that good or great? It's pretty good. All right. Well, let me try and spice it up a bit, because whenever you change something to a building, the tax office in your jurisdiction, here's the ATO, allows you to apportion some to repairs and maintenance and some to improvements, capital improvements. So in the case of this building, about 20% represented repairs. The old wall was crumbling down anyway. So we could claim 20% against income. That means you get a tax write-off, and here your rates are what, 60%, or have they dropped them a bit? So call it 33%. So a third of that you'd get back, right? So it didn't cost 100, it only cost 94,000. You follow me? A third of the 20 you get back in the same year, about 6. So it only costs you 94. Now that remaining 80,000, even though you can't write that off against your income, you can depreciate it. If you don't know what depreciation is, it doesn't matter. You tell your accountant to work out the numbers. But for those of you who know, you have a choice between straight line or usually a slightly higher rate at diminishing value, depending again on your jurisdiction. It varies state by state and country by country. We could depreciate that at 4%. That's pretty hot. So we were down to only a 90,000 expenditure. And my return wasn't 12% of 90. It was 12,000 on 90. It had gone up already. So it was even better. Is that sounding more enticing? All right, so that's great. So I only spend 90,000, but I get 12,000 a year. Some of you aren't excited enough about that yet, so I'm going to spice it up a bit more. You have a choice of paying 100,000 cash and getting 10 back, basically outlay of 90 and getting 12,000 a year. But what I did is I got a valuer in. Because when you spend money to make an improvement, let's say we spend $10,000 on a house, how much does the value of the house go up by? It's 10,000, right? Well, if you're nodding your head, you're too taken by my powers of persuasion. No, it's more, a lot more. If you use that 10,000 to build an extra bedroom, I guess you'd have to do some of the work yourself because that's pretty cheap. But it might go up by 100,000. Are you with me? So I got an appraiser and said, listen, this dingy, horrible, stinky old building has now got a beautiful glass curtain, and anyone on the street can't see that the rest of it is still dingy and old. They think it's all nice and modern. What's it worth now? Well, to keep the story short, he appraised it at about 200,000 more than before. So 100,000 was spent, but the value went up by 200,000. So I went to the bank and I said, Mr. Bank Manager, I have here a new appraisal for the building. There's been a $200,000 increase in value since I last had the appraisal. Would you give me a modest 50% loan? And he said, oh, that's not high. Yes, you don't need more? No, I'm fine. So he gave me 50. What's 50% of 100,000? Of 200? 100,000. But I had to pay interest. What were interest rates at the time? 10%. So I'm paying 10% of 100,000. It's costing me 10,000, but I'm still collecting 12. So we have a choice, folks. You can spend 100,000, get 10,000 back from the government that year, and get 12,000 a year for the rest of your life. Or you can spend no money, you get the mortgage, you only get 2,000 a year, but it's on money you didn't invest. So I opted to do that. And here's the net result. My income, my net income, went up by $2,000 a year. My debt went up by 100,000, but my equity went up by 200,000. My equity went up, my collateral went up, my income went up, my taxes went up. Is paying a lot of tax good or bad? It's hot, folks. I wish my tax bill were 3 million smackaroos a week. And you should too. So when you write out that check for the ATO every year, don't say, oh, gosh, they're ripping me off. Pay it with pleasure. And include a note. Next year, I hope it's a lot more. So all those things went up, but I haven't even hit the most important thing that went up.